Today's video is for anybody who is particularly struggling with a sense of frustration or anger or grief or anxiety. There may be a number of reasons why you are sad or grieving or anxious or frustrated or angry. It may simply be that you look around at the world around you and you see injustice and you see oppression. You see what fellow believers are facing in other countries in the world. Or it may be that at the moment you personally are experiencing some form of persecution, how you are being treated by somebody else, somebody that has power or authority in your life, a family member, a work colleague or employer, a difficult neighbour, or even within the church. And I wanted to draw our attention to the book of Habakkuk this morning. Habakkuk was a prophet. He was speaking just a few years before the people of Judah would be taken into exile into Babylon and the city of Jerusalem destroyed, about 600 years before Jesus came. And Habakkuk prophesies. It's not a long prophecy, it's 3 short chapters towards the end of the Old Testament. But he begins with the question, how long, O Lord? How long must I cry out? And Habakkuk is looking at the injustice and the evil and the violence that he sees around him in his world, in Jerusalem and Judah at his time. He cries out to God, are you listening, God? Will you act? I can't see any sense of salvation, of rescue happening here. What are you going to do? And through the letter, through the prophecy, Habakkuk hears God's answer. And in fact, the answer brings further distress because God says, I am listening, I am watching, and I am acting. But I'm not acting. I'm not going to act in the way that you most immediately expect. I'm not going to bring immediate relief to your trouble. In fact, I'm going to bring further trouble. That the means by which God is going to answer Habakkuk's prayer is by bringing judgment. And that means that those that are doing wrong will be judged. But it also means that those who are righteous and are crying out to God for relief and for justice and for rescue must go through the time of judgment and discipline and suffering with the rest of Judah. How is Habakkuk going to survive, and not just survive, but thrive and be holy in that time of suffering and desolation? Well, I want to suggest that one way that Habakkuk was going to be able to do that was by knowing God, knowing God's identity, knowing God's character, and knowing God's name. Now, my name is David, chosen by my parents. It does have a meaning. Can't remember it at the moment. I think it means something like beloved, loved by God, a gift of God. My second name, John, is a gift, so I'm a beloved gift of God. But it doesn't have a lot to say particularly about my character necessarily. But in Bible times, A name was given to reflect something of somebody's character and identity. So when we name God, we name his character, we name his identity. And what I want to encourage you to do today is read that prophecy, read Habakkuk. As I said, it's short, and to pick up on 6 names by which Habakkuk identifies God. First of all, Habakkuk identifies God as the one who is, O Lord my God, the Holy One. Chapter 1 and verse 12. Secondly, he will say that God is his rock, O Lord our rock, in the same verse. And then in chapter 2, he will describe God as the Lord of hosts, or the Lord of heaven's armies, chapter 2, verse 13. And then in the final chapter, he describes God as the Eternal One, chapter 3, verse 8, but also the God of my salvation, chapter 3, verse 18, and then the one who is the sovereign Lord, in chapter 3, verse 19. I wanted to list all of those names together to give you the full sense of how they're building up a picture of who God is. God is holy. That means that he is distinct from his creation, not part of it, not a created being. That points to his otherness. And because of that, it points to his goodness, that he is not like us. He is different. He is over and above us. He is not subjected to weakness, and he is not subjected to sin. God is eternal. That means God isn't going anywhere. God is not going to die. God is not going to give up, but he is present and eternally present. And the eternal God is the one who is eternally love. He is the Lord of heaven's armies, the one who is able to command the angels of heaven. And that, along with the description of God as the sovereign Lord, describes God's strength and power, that he is eternal and that he is strong and mighty, and he is mighty to save, so that he is the Lord of our salvation. As believers in Christ, we know that God has acted to save. That God, in the person of Jesus, stepped down into history, into our world, and that Jesus' death on the cross and resurrection means that the penalty for our sin is dealt with, but also that evil, sin, and death itself, and Satan, the evil one, are defeated. And that's incredible good news, that God has acted to save. And in a world that is full of mess and pain and grief and evil, that may not always seem immediately obvious and true to us, and yet it remains true. God is the God who saves, the God who has loved you and saved you. And turning back to those names for God reminds us of that truth, that God is holy and just, that God is sovereign and great, that God is loving and good, and that in Christ he has saved you. So that God is my rock, God is your rock, the place of safety and shelter and stability. In a world that is chaotic and changing and frightening, we find safety and security in the Lord our God. We can trust in him. We can depend upon him. So I want to encourage you today just to pause, to remind yourself of who God is, to give thanks to him for his strength and greatness, his love and his goodness, and to re-express your trust in him today.